Good morning and welcome to Hyderabad Literary Festival. Stories often sit at the meeting point of memory and history, shaping how the past is remembered, interpreted, and retold. Today's panel, Story, Memory, and History, brings together writers whose work moves across personal memory, historical imagination, and cultural reflection. We are honored to join by Inez Baranay, who was born, now this is very interesting, who was born in Italy to Hungarian parents, writes in English as an Australian citizen, shaped by a refugee background and transnational cultural experience, and has a cosmopolitan temperament. She has published widely in journals and anthologies and is the author of 10 novels, including Soul Climate. Her novels, Neem Dreams and With the Tiger, were first published in India, and she has taught creative writing in diverse international contexts. Also with us is Ruchir Joshi, author of the novel The Last Jet Engine Laugh, The Last Jet Engine Laugh and Poribortan, a book on the 2011 West Bengal elections. His latest book, The Great Eastern Hotel, is a work of historical fiction set in Calcutta during the World War II. He is also an experienced columnist and documentary filmmaker, known for his award-winning Tales from Planet Kolkata. The conversation will be moderated by Usha Raman, who needs no introduction, but I have to do my job, who is a writer and media studies scholar whose work spans both academic and popular writing. She is the author of a poetry collection, All the Spaces in Between, and the novel Polite Conversations. And she is the editor of Teacher Plus. Usha Raman is also one of the directors of Hyderabad Literary Festival. Over to you, Usha.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me? Loud and clear? Thank you. Thank you all for being here. A little bit later on a Sunday morning, but still not quite Hyderabad morning yet. We have two books here that are very different, it was possible to find resonances between them. Resonances, I suppose, one may consider forced, but I think as readers, when you move from one book to the next, you're constantly carrying the memory of multiple readings, right? So you're always thinking, this seems familiar, or this connects with an idea that I came across in another book. So I read these two books in very quick succession, and I must confess that they did not take the same amount of time, as you can see from the size of the books. It's an interesting juxtaposition, I think, that we have. Inez Baranay's book is, a relatively slim volume, it's set in the years of India's independence struggle, while Ruchir's is also actually in a similar time period. And I would say that there are overlapping years between the two. And so that's one similarity. And the other is, of course, that they are both historical novels, or novels that use history as backdrop. But beyond that, of course, they're very, very, very different stories. One has both of them have multiple protagonists, but there is a central character in Inez's book who is real, whereas in Ruchir's book, the backdrop is, of course, factual, but there are multiple fictional characters. So I'm going to let them talk a little bit more about their books. But I'd like to begin by asking, and maybe responding to the comment that we seem to be living in times when history is more important than ever. Maybe there is never a time when history is not important, but we're living in times when history, what history is, claims to history, claims to a history that is supposed to be ours, and what ours is also contested. So when you're writing or using history to tell stories at this time in our lives, what does it mean? How do you use history? Does it become only context, or does history itself become something that you are playing with? And I'd like both of them to respond to this question. Perhaps we start with Inez and then move on to Ruchir.
Okay. Yes, what is history and how do you use it? It is definitely the case that, at least in Soul Climate, history is a question, and it is something that is constantly being interrogated, and its uses and the ways that it's understood are flexible and fluid and able to be represented in very many ways. And in fact, I quite explicitly discuss the question of history in Soul Climate, as well as chapters centered on the historical person Halide Edip and chapters on each of the three main fictional characters. There are also chapters that I call meta chapters that are more essayistic and discuss issues in the writing of Soul Climate, and one of them is definitely history. And indeed, as Usha said, we live in an age where history is part of what we need to consider as we look at the questions that that trouble us and that we need to resolve politically, socially, culturally, and so on. And one of the phrases that I see over and over again that kind of drives me crazy, because I always want to question it, is this idea of the right side of history. Does history have a side? When does this moment come when this eternal judgment is made? And why is it considered to be the final judgment? And so on and so on. So we could discuss that for quite some time. But in brief, history is something constantly to be questioned and discussed, rather than to take for granted that we know what it is.
No, that's very beautifully put. What is the right side of history? And I guess, in a way, my book is also trying to ask that question at its deepest level, because history is important all the time, you're right, Usha, but at the moment, when there is such a concerted effort in so many different countries to wipe out and rewrite history, it's not just in India where suddenly, the nationalist struggle or the figures from the nationalist struggle are all being juggled around by the current regime and the propaganda machine that they are supported by. It's also suddenly in Trump's America, everything is shifted around to some kind of, first Roosevelt, don't speak softly and carry a big stick, shout loudly and carry a big stick. Suddenly all that stuff is being wiped around. Putin is, of course, arguing that Ukraine's always been part of a greater Russian empire and is killing millions of people for it. So history, wherever we look, is the battleground. It's the Kurukshetra. It's the mental, moral Kurukshetra on which we are fighting constantly. And this book took a long time to write, but as I was writing it, contemporary history was unfolding around me, and I often found myself wondering, why on earth are you writing about 70, 80 years ago when so much is happening around you? There's 9/11, there's the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, Arab Spring. India is going through such violent and turbulent changes. climate change, all this is happening around you, and you are stuck in a pocket of time between 1941 and 1943 in one city, which has changed completely and unrecognizably now. There's an analogy there, because the hotel that I talk about spreads out to become the hotel of the city. The city becomes Great Eastern Hotel, from the Great Eastern Hotel, which actually exists. And there is a metaphor that I come across, that I stumbled across, which I've used, which is Louis Kahn, the architect, says that you can only really see a building when it's a ruin. And when I go around this crazy city, which this is, I mean, mind-boggling to me, this Hyderabad, and I think one day these will be ruins, and will we be able to see them properly then for the first time? Because what happens is, if it's a populated building, if people are coming in and out, you're looking at the people and the building together. Once it's a ruin, whether it's Hampi or Konarak or ruins in Greece or Mesopotamia, wherever, you can actually see what people were trying to do in that moment. And so if you look at a period of history like that, then if I look at the World War and look at that moment, then you can see in those ramparts or the ruins of that time, or the traces of that time, where the India we are today, or the Pakistan we are today, Bangladesh, where it all comes from, the people we are. Impossible to connect to those people who were there, but at the same time, very much of those people. So that's the effort or the attempt that I'm trying to do in the book. Yeah.
Yes. Yes? Okay. So, I mean, that takes me to the second question, again, which has to do both with history and with place. Because both of you have tried to evoke a very specific sense of place, but in very different ways. So, Inez's book is set in Delhi, while Ruchir's, of course, as he just said, is set in Calcutta. And both cities have changed, yet remain the same in certain ways. And I'm wondering what, in some ways, Ruchir sort of hinted at my question, because when you are looking at a city and trying to excavate its social and cultural and political past from the time we are in now, what are the ruins then that you are looking at, right? What becomes the space from which you excavate these things? And while doing that, you're also trying to create a very strong sense of place as it existed before it became the ruin. And in both of your works, I see particularly in Inez's, there is one of these, what she called the meta chapters, where she goes in search of a particular house that features in the story. And similarly, in Ruchir's, there are very detailed descriptions of certain parts of Calcutta at the time. So I'm wondering what is the kind of research, what is the effort it takes to recreate that sense of place from the ruins?
Okay, so, am I on? Yes. Delhi. I had spent times in Delhi earlier, but I didn't really know I'd go back there until the meaning of my life became writing this book. Halide Edip went to Delhi in 1935 because she had met the great freedom fighter M.A. Ansari in Constantinople 20 years earlier, and they were, I think they were instantly kind of comrades in their visions of how each of their nations, which were both at that time involved in freedom struggles, would become independent nations and what they should be. That's, again, another question. She promised him that one day she'd visit India. She took promises seriously. By the time she came, she had been one of the leading freedom fighters in Turkey. Now living in exile, Turkey was a free, independent nation. India still very much in the throes of its independence struggle. And there at the house of Dr. Ansari was some of the great historical meetings among people involved in that struggle. So partly that house itself needed to be imagined, and whether it could be seen became a question too. how could I see the Delhi that Haliday Edip saw? She wrote her own book about India. It's really lovely. It's called Inside India, published in 1936, and there's a new edition. She described Delhi as a white city, which I couldn't quite find itself. She described Delhi as a city of tombs and monuments. In the subsequent years, as anybody knows, many of those monuments have been almost hidden from view once they had land around them and held their place as they should, and now so-called development, has encroached right up to the very walls. So I'm looking at Delhi, trying to see what she saw and looking at it from the present. And because by the time I'm writing this book, I'm very explicitly writing from the present day and very explicitly being the present-day writers searching for the past, trying, failing, imagining, researching, looking in archives and looking in imagination and looking in other people's accounts and finding whatever I could find through whatever means. And all this becomes mixed up in the mind where all these things mix together and produce something, and you can no longer take out each ingredient and separate it again. But I'll just tell you one story about, I was looking for Dr. Ansari's house. I thought it was absolutely essential to see it. Haliday Edip predicted that in the future free India, this house would be one of the precious monuments that would honor those freedom fighters. Alas, this is not the case, because some freedom fighters have been, we talk about history, have been almost obliterated from the current official history of those days. So there's a sad interlude where I'm in old Delhi, in its streets, trying and failing to look at this house, but eventually I'm at the archives at the Jamia University, the Premchand Archives, and there an archivist brings me a big photo album full of big, glossy, black and white photos of Dr. Ansari's house, exterior, interior, all the rooms. It was so exciting and moving to see this. The librarians, I love librarians, they should rule the world. The librarians and their warm help and pleasure in my quest. And these photos at the time were not online, I don't know if they are, but it wouldn't have been the same as seeing things so diligently preserved and having that aura of authenticity and seeing aspects of the house that I had actually imagined were really like that. So where is the past found, and how you do your research, as we all know, it can be full of surprises, and you might find something where you never even thought that you would be looking for it.
Yes, so the first thing I have to say is, Delhi is fascinating, because I was just telling somebody the other day when I was in Defense Colony that I'd first gone to Delhi in the 60s, and Defense Colony was just open grounds with a building here, a bungalow there, a tree there. And today, if you go into Defense, it's just an overgrown jungle of concrete. Impossible to remember that almost that time. Golf links, all these places were so sparsely populated in the 60s and 70s when I first went to Delhi as a child. Calcutta, on the other hand, has got layers and layers and layers and layers of palimpsest of architecture on the city. And unfortunately, we don't care about our heritage much, so a lot of it is just lost because of carelessness, indifference, cynicism, and plain greed. No one cares about, some precious building from the late 18th century, some early 19th century building, or what building belonged to who. that stuff is in a state of very bad disrepair. And as is our memory and our kind of, you know, I don't want to use the word husbanding because it's very, very gendered, but as a protecting or nurturing of history and historical memory, it's all kind of fraying and lost. And succeeding governments have been responsible for this. The first Congress government, then the communist government, and now the Trinamool is attempting some stuff, but too late, too little, and without much thought. So I had to do my research on the one hand in that constantly crumbling and disappearing city, which is a separate novel on its own almost, which somebody should write, perhaps not me. At the same time, that period of history was one of the most fecund, most fertile, most turbulent periods of Calcutta's history. Everything seemed to be happening at that time. You know, you had what was still the most cosmopolitan city. The Raj had, you know, moved out to Delhi, but Delhi was, you know, it was Lachin's Delhi and it was old Delhi. And basically, it was where the files were pushed and where politics was played out, where people gravitated to Delhi to meet and discuss stuff. But in terms of absolute real culture, it was Bombay and Calcutta, a bit Chennai, but Lahore, Lucknow, Allahabad. These were the places where, you know, and in the south perhaps Hyderabad. These were the places which were vibrant, populated, crowded, loud, noisy, where India's urban soul resided. And there was too much going on in Calcutta, so I spent a lot of time just floundering in my research. I mean, every nationality was there. Every kind of Indian ethnicity and background was there because of it was a commercial hub, it was a cultural hub, it was a political hub. And then on top of that, when the war begins, suddenly the soldiers start to come in. So first it's the Tommies, then it's the Australia, New Zealand soldiers. Then when America joins the war, it's the Americans with their segregated army of black soldiers and white soldiers. African soldiers, separate from black American soldiers, kept completely different. Kenyans, they are brought in as well. You have the Chinese, you have multiple other ethnicities and races, all crowded into this little city. I mean, the area-wise a small city. And in that, events happen, things move, things around the city change. And I was trying to research and sift through that stuff. So it was like, I say, it was like being in a oversupplied sweet shop, and you couldn't have everything. And you really had to deny yourself stuff that, no, that's a great image, or that's a fantastic story. No, I cannot include it in my novel. No, this can't be in the novel. No, this doesn't fit. So history as a research thing is great, but I didn't want to make a sort of Christmas tree of a novel where the historical research hangs like baubles on the shiny baubles and people are looking at that. I mean, quite often, not yours, I'm sure, not mine, but other historical novels fall into that trap of showing off their research. They look how hard I worked, look how I'm joining the dots. And the actual story, the actual quality of writing, the actual quality of getting in, following a character or an idea, all that stuff kind of takes a backseat. I was anxious that that should not happen. I mean, that's the attempt in this book. So the research all had to be subservient and subordinate to what the characters in the story was demanding. So a lot of good stuff, quote unquote, got left out, but there's enough there to push and propel the story, I feel, I hope.
So would you like to give us a sense of that by reading a small piece?
Sure, I can do that, just, yeah. So the hotel and outside the hotel and the different hotel just outside the boundary of the hotel. One of the conceits I had was that the RAF and the Indian Air Force had, the Royal Indian Air Force as it was then, had several planes and fighter planes and everything flying out of Calcutta, but it also had reconnaissance planes. So every now and then I get one of my characters to climb into a reconnaissance plane and a gypsy moth, tiger moth, and fly over the city, taking a look around the city. And so I get that drone eye view that you get in cinema nowadays, when those days would have been a bird's eye view or an aeroplane eye view. And you get different levels of the city. And from there, I come back to the hotel or I come back into a situation. So I'm just going to read one portion where the two different sections, where one is you're flying over the city and then you come down to the ground. So you're in an aeroplane. You would cross the river, the cockpit windows rattling in the breeze coming over the water, and take the plane in a curve over the almost completed new bridge and Howrah station. You would then come back over the Hooghly, perhaps flying over Governor House to slow down over the Great Eastern. In this approach, you would spot the dull olive green vehicles lined up outside the hotel, the roof and bonnet of many of them painted with the white five-pointed star of the US Army. In either case, whether flying in from the south or the north, looking down, you would see a section at the southern end of the hotel's terrace, fenced off with high netting to protect a rust-colored surface painted with the familiar design of neat white lines. With the sun strengthening towards what is sure to be a sweltering noon, on this rectangle of red-brown, you would see two figures engaging in short dance movements, yanking their shadows this way and that in the jerky choreography of a game of tennis. So there's a tennis court on the roof of the hotel, and these two British officers are playing tennis on the roof, so which you got from other references earlier in the book as well. From the smack of the gut strings, the ball climbs and curves over the wire netting. Lambert's eyes follow it as it drops, obeying the parabola initiated by the racket until it passes the jut of the hotel building. It then develops a will of its own, plummeting straight down towards the lane below. The furry white orb parts company with the stained whitewash of the hotel and becomes a planet against the dark gray of the road. Remember, tennis balls in the old days were white, not yellow. This is these kind of details. You know, I almost wrote yellow and they said, no, yellow balls only came into existence in the 1970s. So that is the research detail that comes in. The furry white orb parts company with the stained whitewash of the hotel becomes a planet against dark gray of the road. It hits the asphalt, comes back up, the dot enlarging and receding and enlarging again until it bounces quietly towards the hooves of a pony tethered to a jhuri gadi. Before it can go under the horse, there's a blur of rags, a small child running to the ball, trying to grab it. The ball evades the first snatch, but the kid traps it on the second attempt, down on all fours now. The boy moves away from the jhuri gadi, protecting the ball from the disinterested pony. A few feet down the street, he stops, looks around, squats down, and brings the thing to his mouth, teeth ready. Lambert's stomach tightens as the boy bites into the ball. The boy's head jerks back in shock, the dirty white wool unyielding, the hard rubber underneath hurting his teeth. But he doesn't give up, turns the thing and looks for another opening. This time, the kid tries the seam, trying to suck it open, but the ball repels him again. The face turns upwards, and even from this distance, Lambert can see the enlarged eyes, wide, staring at the sky, uncomprehending. The kid's stomach heaves, trying to bring out a howl, but he can only manage a scraping of breath. Not something Lambert can actually hear, yet he can. After a beat, Lambert realizes it's his own breath that's replicating what is beyond earshot. A woman, not old, yet ancient in her movement, comes out from behind the row of horse carriages and bends over the howling boy. She takes the ball from his hand, examines it, smells it, and then flings it away towards the runnel of water at the edge of the road. She grabs the boy's arm and drags him back into the shadows. So this is the first signs of famine on the streets of Calcutta, where people are so hungry that they will try and eat anything. And this man from his hotel sees that and realizes what's going on. So that's that.
Yeah, in fact, as you're reading this, I'm reminded in several places in the book, we are offered a very cinematic eye. In fact, and maybe that's your training in cinema and your approach to thinking through a scene is influenced by that. Would you agree?
everyone's spoken about the cinematic quality of the book. I mean, Paro's here. Geeta has also been aiding and abetting several of my film attempts, etc. So, yeah, I've been involved in cinema and wanting to make cinema or trying to make cinema for a long time. I do make a separation between, as does Paro with her writing and filmmaking and other activities. I also try and separate my painting and photography and cinema and writing, but sometimes, of course, the stuff bleeds into these things, and the cinematic quality perhaps is just when I start to describe something, I wanted to make sure that the reader is completely immersed in that time. So whether it's touch or smell or the light or the texture of, or the nature of a building or a road, there is that kind of description without making it too thick and too boring or too heavy so that it becomes boring. At the same time, when you're trying to imagine a scene, sometimes, yeah, maybe my instinct is to move from, one kind, a long shot which tracks in, or a short breakdown from a telly to a wide to a macro or stuff like that. But, I think the book also has passages which I think are completely anti-cinematic, impossible to film. So hopefully there's enough of both that there's a pulsation between the two.
No, I think it's because you begin with such a cinematic frame that it seems to set a tone for the book.
Possibly, yeah.
But moving on to Inez, would you like to read something from the book? And again, the way you establish sense of place is very different.
Yes, are we on? Yes. Even more contrast. So difficult to choose a piece because of the many different kinds and strands of chapters that there are. So I'll just read little bits from an early chapter where Holiday has just arrived in Delhi, and this is the first evening with a reception for her. Her host presents Holiday to the assembled guests with a gracious little speech saying, as he has said before, that she represents, quote, a harmonious fusion of all that is best in the East and West of today. The guests at this reception this evening would know of the warm admiration he has for her as a leader, an educationalist, a writer, a rare personality. Dr. Ansari has written to a friend that she is, quote, a great world figure, and her visit is of great moment. It is not a very formal occasion, this evening's reception, no press, but even the inner circle is rather large. People circulate in the open rooms on the ground floor, and in spite of the chill on the terrace outside, women are dressed mostly in their customary apparel, saris with a woolen jacket, or the local style of suit, a tunic or long shirt over pants with a matching long scarf. This is Holiday's perception, of course. Some men wear a waistcoat over a long kurta. Men are mostly in a fashion that seems to Holiday to be a fusion of the Western suit with an Eastern style of jacket. Ansari's biographer says he dressed in khadi when he met her on arrival at the Delhi station. Let's say that's what he wears tonight. So now we have a bit of a discussion about the food and some conversations about food and India and Turkish food. Compared. This pleasantly Catholic exchange is interrupted. So you are the fusion of East and West, and so asks, in fact demands, a man. And so what, in her view, he demands, was best in the East, and what was best in the West, and how did they compare? Holiday says, as kindly as she could, I will speak of this in my lectures. What does the demanding man want? A custom-made exclusive précis of the very topic she has been invited to address, or perhaps to assess and judge her reply to him? Not even that. What he wants is to tell her his own view, and he begins to utter his disquisition. And then we have some passages where she is rescued by some women, and we have some discussions among the women. You will meet Mahatma Gandhi, the women tell her at the reception on the first evening in Delhi. With pleasure, says Holiday, I look forward to it. She does, very much. She's very keen to observe this phenomenon. She says they know of him everywhere. She will visit him at the local headquarters before her lecture series commences. One or two of the women were saying what he meant to them. He was a leader, an example like no other, while others seemed to be giving her a coded warning she could not quite acknowledge. If women are all one nation, they must not create partitions between them. Halliday had seen enough of partitions where there should be commonality. How difference might coexist with common cause will be, she already can see, a theme of her travels here.
Thank you. So before we turn it over to the audience for questions, I have one other sort of question about historical fiction or fiction that uses history. And I wonder if, in today's, what some have called post-truth era, the true history can only be found in fiction, right? So because you are unconstrained in some ways, in the way you can tell people's stories within a historical frame, and as you said, you do have to look for detail. And that detail may not only be material, but it may be other kinds of detail, which then offers the reader perhaps a truer sense of history than the many contested histories that they may be presented with, particularly in our times. And I'm wondering if you have a comment on that, because I think lately we've had this trend of many popular histories coming out. And I think there's an appetite in the public for multiple histories. But yet, there's a suspicion. So was this history written from a particular ideological frame? Does it have an agenda? Whereas fiction also has an agenda, but we tend to not implicate the writer as much in an ideological space as we do with nonfiction. So could you puzzle through that?
I mean, it's a broad question. I've tried to look at history and then, basically, well, it can't be too neat and tidy either. It has to be, for me, slightly smudged, slightly out of focus as well, at times blurred. There has to be some freaky takeoff. Otherwise, it becomes a very well choreographed kind of rendition of that time, which I've really fought against doing. So, for example, in one party scene, I've got these, talking about Gandhi reminded me, these two fancy dress characters who are both European, a man and a woman, who are both dressed up as Gandhi in this fancy, other people have come as Napoleon and they've come as, harlequins or whatever, and these two have dressed up as Gandhis, and they're both dancing the boogie-woogie with each other. So if you can imagine a sort of two white Gandhis with these false mustaches dancing and then later doing other things. Now that's something there's no historical basis for that, but it could very well have happened in the kind of parties that were taking place in the Calcutta of that time. So in that sense, I have taken liberties, of course, where everything is not based on absolute research or absolute fact, which is something a fiction writer can do, which a non-fiction writer can't do. I mean, there's a time when somebody said to me that, if you're reading Anthony Beevor, the Second World War historian, if Beevor says that the German tanks advanced, the sunlight glinting off their barrels, of their muzzle, of their cannon barrels, you can be sure that was a sunny day. And I thought, well, that's all fine and dandy. I love reading exact, beautiful historical, books about, and I'm glad I can trust Beevor about the sunlight on that day. But as a novelist, if I should choose to turn that day cloudy, I have the license to do so. What I cannot do is I can't suddenly make it snow in Calcutta, or that the German tanks advanced through banana trees in Stalingrad. There are no banana trees in Stalingrad. So there are constraints of history, and then there are pockets and areas where you can play as a writer, which as a historical writer of nonfiction, you're bound by, you can't do that. So that was for me an all-important distinction.
That might be speculative climate fiction. Yes.
Yes, it's an enormous question. And if it's true that people want various versions and points of view of history, that's all to the good, because it's a recognition that any history is being written from a certain point of view at a certain time in a certain context with possibly limited knowledge available and all the other constraints and restrictions that even the most wide-ranging books do. As we know, biographies of significant figures are written over and over and over again. It's never finished. Accounts of great historical events, etc., are told over and over again, reinterpreted, retold, and so on. Where does fiction come in? It allows for the human experience, and I think there's something to be said for the knowledge that comes to imagination. And I think the human gift of imagination, as much as anything else, is a kind of portal into knowledge in ways that mere rationality can't really fully account for. But as Ruchir said, it has to be the case that it could have been like that. It has to be plausible. It has to be based on what can be known. And within that, the writer's own sense of a common humanity, perhaps, and of the power of imagination to reach into that common humanity, to be in another place at another time and look around and experience and see and report, is part of the fiction writer's work.
Thank you. I think we have about 8 to 10 minutes for questions. So if anyone in the audience would like to raise a hand. Do you need a mic?
I have.
Okay. Over there.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the wonderful panel as always. So I was born and brought up in Kolkata for the first 18 years of my life, and I've moved away. And so I've noticed the shift already, right? Like, you know, when I would grow up at that time, there was this rich appreciation for all of the arts. Like, I was enrolled in all of the arts classes, literature and everything. And I've started noticing the shift already. So I don't know, is it like a, you know, is it just the political environment or like a mix of a lot of cultural events as well? So I would want to know if it's possible to revert back to that, you know, as it was when I was growing up and my parents would take me to all of these events and everything. And yeah, or is it, you know, there's no way out of that thing?
When were you growing up in Calcutta?
I know it's too small of a time.
Which years? Sorry.
I was born in 2004. So for college, I moved out after I was 18. So yeah.
Okay, no, that's lovely. Look, Calcutta used to be the center of culture 80 years ago when Tagore dies, when this book begins, right? But since then, that position of Calcutta has been suffering a long, slow, lingering death, like in those melodramatic movies where, you know, somebody gets shot with an arrow or a bullet and then they take 20 minutes to die. Calcutta is taking about 100 years to die from being the cultural capital. So we who live in Calcutta or people from outside keep saying, oh, Calcutta is so culturally wonderful, oh my God, such a lot of culture. And it's true that people read a lot in Calcutta. There is a lot of regard for ideas of culture. But actually, you know, from the 60s, I hate to say this in front of Paromita because we have this Bombay-Calcutta rivalry. Bombay's been far more vibrant in the visual arts and in cinema, and I dare say even in theater, not in theater perhaps, but a lot of things from the 60s and 70s. From the 80s, you get Delhi and Bangalore. And now, I suspect, you know, Hyderabad and other places will be taking up the ball and running with it. Whereas Calcutta is reviving itself. There are pockets of cultural revival that are happening. But it's going to take time, because when there's a kind of devastation that's ongoing, the re-greening of a place comes in unexpected ways. So by the time you were born in 2004, I don't mean to sound ageist, Calcutta was already a dead zone for culture, and it was already, in fact, growing back a bit. So, there's always a pulsation, movement back and forth between, Bombay was a great cosmopolitan city, and then the Shiv Sena comes in, and then suddenly it's like a blanket has been thrown over that town. Delhi is very vibrant, and suddenly now you got the Modi government, they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So we are struggling there, political stuff, technological stuff, historical movements, all of these push and pull against a city or a place being a cultural center. So, watch this space. All I would say is the short answer.
Hello. Thank you for the wonderful session. So I had two questions. However, I'd like to club it to one. So when we write historical fiction or metafiction, let's say, we tend to aesthetize the idea of ruins and struggles. And isn't that overpowering the actual violence that has taken place in the history in different accounts? And also, we see the curriculum or the syllabus being changed a lot with the political winds. So do you think that historical fiction can somehow be also incorporated in the syllabus? Because we don't know what the actual truth is since we live in the post-truth era. So what would be your take on that?
So the question of historical fiction being set in a curricula or, I think one of the things about fiction is that it defies curricula and it defies the way things are taught at school. And so I'm not really quite sure that I think that's such a great idea, although of course it's great for a writer when their work is set on curricula because more people and young people will get to know their work. They may get to know it under a condition of what may be experienced as oppressiveness and some kind of instruction in a proper way and an improper way and a wrong way to read it, and if it's made the subject of exams and assignments and so on. I can't feel that this is a wonderful fate for a novel, but that is because I don't work in that sphere and I have this rather idealistic and maybe unrealistic idea of fiction being pursued in a sense of pleasure and knowledge being sought outside of rigid educational frameworks, especially at earlier stages of education. You may have a very different answer.
No, I very quickly, what is taught in the curriculum, what is not. India is not the only place where history is being obfuscated. If you go to London and you look at what the kids are being taught in school there, nowhere, anywhere in England, has there been a proper course set for British imperial history and the crimes of empire. The British kids are not made aware of their country's dark and evil history at all. When they come to college, they suddenly realize, oh, actually, this is what it is. But in school, you're not taught this, right? Similarly, I think in America, there's these battlegrounds where they're trying to, again, rub out black history, again, rub out alternative struggles and make it a sort of white male country again, make America white male misogynistic again, or even more, whatever. So these pushes and pulls will continue. I think anyone who's halfway intelligent has to break out of the curriculum and search outside and search against the grain to find whatever they can to find out what's going on. And that'll always be the case.
Yeah. This is a question to Ruchir Joshi. I just want to say again that what a fascinating novel it was, and it's a doorstopper of a novel which you couldn't put down. Talking about periodization, you said, the book is set between 1941 and 43. 41, Tagore's death, 43, the famine. When you think of Calcutta of 1940s, you think of the famine. and you think of the killings of 46. Given that, again, what you said earlier, speaking to the moment of today, the killings of 46 speak to us today in terms of what's going on. I wonder why you didn't bring in 46. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's nowhere in the book. You know, there's Tebaga, there's much else, but the 46 is not there. Is it because it's too much to handle, or?
No, it is there, as is the famine. I actually stopped the book. There's two different parts of the narrative. So one narrative starts from August 1941 when Tagore dies and ends in the very early January of 1943, where the Japanese have begun to bomb Calcutta and unmistakable signs of famine are everywhere. They've been creeping into the city from 42 onwards, but by early 43 we know that this is going to hit, and they're certainly all over the countryside where the cycles and boats have been confiscated. Famine is already, beginning to hit very badly. So the book ends there at one level, but at another level, the narrator, he or she, whoever they are, and other characters in the book, older, are looking back at everything that happens after 43 from the vantage point of the 1970s. And there, they talk about the famine in detail. They talk about the killings, not in detail, but there are some vivid images. For example, the Hindus and Muslims would be throwing stones and knifing and fighting each other across the street, and then 9 o'clock every morning they would stop and pull back and clear the road from 9 o'clock to 10:30 in the morning around markets, so that the Christians and Jews could go do their shopping and go back home, and then they start killing again. Unimaginable. But that's what also happens in Calcutta. That's mentioned there. The streets flowing with blood and partition, and then there's a whole Tebaga movement which straddles across the famine and partition and independence. So those things are mentioned, but from a retrospective point of view. And the reason for that is that if you look at Bengali literature, there's many books about around the famine, around independence, around the killings. And I didn't want to go through that ground again just simply so that it could be written in English. I wanted to do a new novel which threw a different kind of light onto those events. So I concentrated and tried to build it up almost in a negative space. Or as one idea I had in my head is, as Kumar Gandharv used to say, other people sing the full face of the rag, and I try and catch the profile. So I guess in a sense I was trying to catch the profile of those events rather than the full face which we know already really well.
Take one more question.
Thank you. I'd like to ask both Inez and Ruchir, and in fact Usha as well, for your reactions to a comment I'm going to quote from a professional historian who's recently published a history book covering some of the same overlapping periods as you both written about. And when she was, and naturally she's a professional historian, so she's writing with sourcing and data. And what she's written contradicts some of the popular histories that have come out recently. So someone asked her, just a few weeks ago, what is truth? And she, a professional historian, said, that's above my pay grade. So I'd like to ask, certainly Inez and Ruchir, definitely what your reactions are to that, and Usha too, because it actually covers the first and the last points you made.
I'm going to do a cop-out and say that on this panel, that's above my pay grade.
She would have been very foolish to try and answer with any definition of truth, surely. She used a contemporary cliche to point out the fact that the question of what is truth is something that you could have, a 3-day seminar about, and there would never be a conclusion that everybody would sign off on. I think, perhaps like history itself, it's a question that's constantly being asked and examined, and I, for one, have the greatest distrust of anybody who claims to know any truth or has any certainty, probably about anything.
I would agree with Inez. What is the truth? Comes in multiple forms and it shifts all the time. So we are not, as a novelist, I'm not even on the payment register, forget about pay grade. And yet, I think people like Inez and I will find a truth that you won't find in the history books, perhaps. And at least that is the hope, and that has been my perception reading other novelists. So, yeah.
Just to quickly, there's a difference between a truth that doesn't exist, which claims to be universal and eternal and always applicable, and the truth of moments that can be found.
Thank you so much, Usha, Inez, and Ruchir, for a most invigorating conversation. Thank you so much.